So yeah, hi Jordan. I'm
Hi.
really hi. I promised not to talk over you, and I just did. Sorry about that.
No, I just did it back to you. Okay. Yeah. Here, let's try again. Take two.
No worries. Let's
All
do
right.
it.
All right. Go for
Um,
it.
yeah. So today we're going to be talking about workplace mental health and well-being, and we're really excited to have you here today because. As we know, you're one of the leaders in the space now in Canada. And a lot of our audience, I think, will benefit a lot from this conversation because a lot of them, whether they run their own businesses or work in decision-making roles within the businesses, we've noticed that this has been a real pressure point, a real challenge for them. So I'd like to pick your brain on it. Um,
Wonderful. Well,
yeah.
thanks for having me. And I'm an open book. Look, this is one of those topics where I think it's something that's very much in vogue right now, but often there's a lot of fluff around it. So if I can be
Mhm.
helpful in demystifying or simplifying anything today, let's do it.
Amazing. Well, why don't we start with learning a little bit about you and your background, and what brought you here today? Can you tell me a bit about your work in the corporate space?
Sure. So we're kind of our company is interesting because we do two things. We do individual therapy. We have a team of about 80 therapists all over North America, all over
Mhm.
Canada, and then we have our workplace training side. And when we brought those two arms of the company together, initially as two separate businesses. So my partner was running the therapy business, I was running the training business, and then when we combined them, we were very confused of how to explain this to other people, to the market, how to sell the services. But what we started to realize is that our individual clients that were receiving therapy from our team, they wanted to see more in their workplace. They wanted to see more out of their managers, more out of their HR policies around how the aha moments they were having in their therapy sessions could be translated into their everyday working lives. Because therapy is all well and good, but if it's just something that happens for you in private, it will only echo that far in your life. And so we realized pretty quickly that a lot of workplaces and organizations more broadly, whether it's nonprofit or student organizations or et cetera,
Mhm.
that every organization is grappling with this topic. So over the last 5 years, we've really honed into that, developing a suite of different products and tools that we now work with workplaces across North America to implement. And it's kind of wild because it all came from this one of those sort of like little insights of like, ooh, like, well, our individual clients are asking for this. Maybe we should lean into that.
Mhm.
And so fast forward to today, I mean, we work with companies like LinkedIn, Shopify, Zero, big research institutions like the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard. They have 5,000 scientists on staff. They're the place that mapped the human genome. The Human Genome Project lives there. And it's just been like this incredible journey of, oh my goodness, like, these big leaders, they're struggling with this too. And that's been very humbling, I think, to talk to like C-suites of these organizations we hear of every day and realize that they're a little lost as well. And
Mhm.
so I think it's opened the door for this really interesting window of time right now where people like us are able to engage with these business leaders and start to build a broader understanding of like what is the role of an organization in promoting employee mental health. What is the expectations of leaders and executives in feeling safe and encouraged in their own mental wellness? And
Mhm.
ultimately, how can this be engaged as approached not just as like some value add for the organization, but how can it be something where an organization is really laying a big stake into this and saying, we are going to champion our people's wellness. We are going to utilize this not just as a perk, but we believe that this is good for the business
Mhm.
and for society. And we're seeing more and more companies get to that point, which is really exciting. So all of that is to say is we kind of fell into this, is the honest truth.
Hmm.
And it's been an amazing journey since.
Amazing. So why is then adopting a wellness practice, mental health support systems important for organizations? What are some of the benefits that they see?
Well, if you asked me that question, 5, 8 years ago, I would have a very different answer. At that point in time, I would have said, well, it's a wonderful way for retention of employees.
Mhm.
It's nice. Employees benefit from feeling very much as though that when things get tough, that their employer will have their backs, just like they would with having health and dental benefits.
Mm.
But now, fast forward a number of years, the real benefit is twofold. So on one side, we are at a wider societal acceptance that everyone has mental health challenges in their own way, shape, or form. Now, when I say mental health, that is inclusive of mental wellness and mental illness, like the broad
Yeah.
sort of category, right? And so when we think of mental health as a big bucket, we all have our own things. And so if we accept that premise, and then we start to look at the societal ways that we get support, it raises a bunch of questions. And one of the big questions is, well, where can I actually get support? And support can mean a lot of different things. It does not have to mean speaking to a therapist, but like, where can I explore these topics with people that I trust? Where can I explore this openly with people that I'm around every day? How is there different services that are available to me as a member of this organization? Blah 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 blah. And ultimately, what it points to is, like, if you accept this premise that we all have something, then it is in the organization's best interest to serve that need, because frankly, especially in places like Canada and in the States and otherwise, these services that are available to promote mental health, for example, access to therapy, are greatly limited. Like, there just is not enough publicly funded or even private pay therapists and professionals to really move the needle in a meaningful way at a societal level. So that burden's being passed to workplaces. Now, that is an amazing, I use the term burden because, from a bottom line perspective, that's very much like what a CFO would say. But it's actually an amazing opportunity, because what these workplaces are doing is they're saying, hey, how can I help you reach your self-actualization? Because we all know, especially when you're 20, 30, 40 something, like, the things that are keeping you up at night are probably pointing towards some incredible areas of personal growth and development. And if that growth can be facilitated in part by your work and your career, that is a net positive for the organization. Why?
Mhm.
Because it builds psychological safety and more investment. So we see organizations that lean into this stuff. They have a much higher success rate in terms of retaining key employees. They are able to actually have more effective employees as well, that generate, in a sales category, more sales, and engineering, more engineering output. You see that there's faster growth, more growth, I should say, among the ranks to higher roles. And all of this was initially piloted in a project called Project Aristotle by Google. And that
Mm.
project, look it up if you haven't heard of it, to all the listeners out there, it really changed the game in how workplaces started to see these opportunities, because they really are. And so, in short, it's really about two things: the self-actualization, so ensuring that your people can truly be the best that they can, but also understanding that they will be more effective, more invested employees, which has a financial it has a financial impact on the organization positively.
Mm.
So that's why we're at this sweet moment in time. Now, from the employee perspective, employees are looking for places where uh, we can, we all want to be ourselves at work. More and more, we don't want to feel like we're someone different at work versus at home. We just want to be who we are. We want that alignment. And so the more that we can find that in our work, the more rewarding that our career will be. And so it really is a win-win as we get into it, especially with the kinds of companies that we work with, like tech
Mm.
companies and sort of those bigger level category leaders that are really trying to have incredible workplaces.
Yeah. Well, one of the stats I came across at one point, which really stood out to me, was one of the main, I think it was as big as one of the three top reasons why people stay at a company is their feeling of loyalty to the place, or their emotional connection to the place. So if you feel supported for everything that you are, then I can totally see how that would create that positive affinity towards that company and make it harder for you to leave, even if there is, better money elsewhere or whatever it feels with that connection
Oh
to a
yeah,
place really.
we see it all the time. Organizations are really great at retaining people if they're able to have a shared sense of belonging and community in their company. And
Mhm.
I think for a long time, we were facilitating that um, in a way that it almost played into this societal trend where we could feel a sense of belonging and connection with those that are around us, even while faking it a little bit. And now our generation is craving that more of that authenticity and vulnerability and that alignment. And so now, if our company or your company, whoever is listening out there, if your company can be a vessel for bringing that out of you, you will never forget that. That will leave a mark. And even if you do leave, like that growth that you can experience there will so far surpass like most other memories you will have of the work, that you will regard that place as a fantastic place to work, that's rewarding, that's enriching. And that is what great companies are striving for.
Mhm.
It's so funny because for a long time, like in the tech sector, as one example, there was this belief that if we just let people have fun, that they will stay. Like the classic example of like Facebook having like an all-you-can-eat candy buffet. Like, cool, okay, great, cool perk. Probably costs thousands every month per office to make that happen. But ultimately, that's not what makes people stay. That's what makes people join up with a bright and shiny. But that's not going to retain people, especially the kinds of smart, driven, compassionate, passionate people that these companies want to retain.
Mhm.
And so it's something that's being led by this one a pretty wide segment of creative, innovative organizations. But what I will say is, it's not just those organizations anymore. Like we've worked with like companies that make boxes. No joke. Like actual, I'm not going to name the company, but like a big company that makes boxes, and they are leaning into this stuff hard because
Mhm.
it's becoming more widely appreciated that everyone has mental health challenges, which is fantastic. But B, they're starting to see the value of it. And so companies big and small of all segments are getting into this. And um, I don't even, getting into this isn't doing it justice, because it really is a new way of thinking about your relationships at work, which has huge implications for leadership, huge implications for HR, and also just like really makes you rethink a lot of the model of what you're fundamentally trying to do within your teamwork and your culture.
Yeah.
So all that being said, is it's a really interesting time to work in this field, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree there that this generation is starting to push that more and more. Because certainly from stories I've heard from when my parents used to work in corporate, they're retired now. It was a completely different world. So that's really, it's fantastic. Um, so what does it look like, practically speaking? What does a good, healthy environment look like that's supportive of mental wellness in a workplace? What are some examples of some of the practices and tools that they have available to their staff?
So there's a lot of great examples, but and to lead into a couple examples, I'll explain just a quick system that we use as a bit of a gut check.
Mhm.
So we kind of had this feeling for a long time, we as in like the amalgamated corporate machine. We had this feeling that if you were just there for people in times of need, that you would nurture mental health.
Mhm.
But with the rise of especially the term mental well-being or mental wellness, we're starting to appreciate that like it's not just about taking people from a bad place to a good place. It's also
Mhm.
about people just nurturing healthy everyday habits and skills and routines that are
Mhm.
going to positively impact how they're doing. So having said that, we started to look at this from a more systemic approach. So the first thing, there's three buckets, and all of them overlap in a way to form this very nice Venn diagram. If we had slides right now, I would blow your mind with
Yeah.
this Venn diagram. But in effect, the first thing is about policy. So from a workplace perspective, what is the policies that you have to support and improve employee mental well-being? And like the policies can be inclusive of like hard things that we imagine, like policies, like managerial policies, time off policies, HR policies, benefits. That's one thing, right? Like, so how are we taking a hard look at the brass tacks? Then the second thing is actions. So what are the actions or routines that we are actually engaging in every day as a team? How are we teaching our managers to be more empathetic? How are we creating opportunities for team members to really see and hear each other when they are challenged with something or when something exciting happens? How are we celebrating people? Like, what are those little things we do every day to build culture? And how we're managing people. And then the third is, what's our vision? So, just like a company has a vision, if you want to have a transformational policy in your organization, you have to have a vision for that too. Like, where the hell are we trying to go here, right? And so we actually work with companies on having a vision for what they are going to stand for as it relates to employee mental health. So like, what is the vision? Like, how do you want people to feel here? How do you want people to feel when they're down and out? How do you want people to understand the relationships they have at work in supporting them throughout their life? Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And that is actually a fascinating conversation to have because, speaking of the years when our parents were working in corporate America, Canada, or Australia, I mean, it totally, like, that question would have never come up. But what we found is we have a bunch of evaluative criteria, but like if we look at those three buckets, you can start to get pretty clear on the elements that are involved. And the thing why those three buckets are important is because if you just have a vision, but no actions or policies, you're just sort of blowing smoke. If you just have actions and maybe no vision or no policies, you're shooting from the hip. If you have just policies, then you're just kind of like doing something that's a very academic theoretical exercise, and that's no good either. So you really need that sweet spot combination because it makes this big, hairy topic much more applicable to the everyday working lives. Like most people that work at organizations that are fast moving, they don't have time to sit around all day and just think about this stuff, right? Like, and so this is one of the things, like we always come back to how can we make this sticky? How can we make this simple? Because we need to get down to the level where we're like, yo, employees, these are your responsibilities to ensure your own mental well-being. Here are the policies that are behind you, but here are the things we need you to do. And here's where we're going. Okay, people managers, you next. Here's what you need to do, A, B, and C. And you need to be aware of these policies, blah, 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 and make sure that everything you do goes back to this vision. Hey, executives, I know you can be a pain in the ass sometimes, and I know you like to shoot from the hip, but we're not doing that shit anymore. Instead, we are going to take a hard look at everything that's going on in this company and making sure that's all steering in the same direction, including any chaotic behavior that you may have. We are going to rein that shit in. Excuse my language. But seriously, these are the conversations we'll have with companies, and it's amazing because we start to pull apart all the pieces. Now, in practice, what does this mean? So when organizations are firing on cylinders, it will not, like, there's no universal example I can give you that it'll like be the same in every workplace, but like a couple examples that demonstrate this. So we do a lot of work with Children's Aid. And one of the workshops that we offer is this 2-hour, half-day-ish one where we start to look at what are some concrete actions that would cost less than $100, take less than an hour, not require any big managerial oversight. What's something that we could create that could launch in 2 weeks that would genuinely benefit your employees' wellness? And we'll do like a rapid iteration brainstorm exercise. We'll have people prototype the different like campaign or idea or whatever by like drawing it out, pitching it to colleagues. And we go through this whole thing where you're basically getting feedback from people, you're testing, you're iterating. It's kind of like it's kind of like how a tech company would like, prototype an app or something. And one of the things I came up with Children's Aid was, so whenever someone is dealing with a bad case, sometimes there's really nowhere to go. And when you're struggling, you got off a very difficult phone call with a family that you're, maybe doing some deep work with in terms of like their parenting, or maybe they're at risk of losing their children, like really heart-wrenching shit, right? Maybe what was one of the main detractors of wellness was that there wasn't the feeling that I, as in someone that works at Children's Aid, that I had anywhere to go. So they actually created a campaign where anyone that's part of certain teams can send out an email to their entire team anytime that one of these difficult scenarios happens, with a word in the subject line. And for the life of me, I can't remember the word right now, but let's just say like, broken heart emoji was the subject line of an email. And then the team knew that for anyone that was available in the office at that time, that they would go to that one room for 10 minutes, a specific room that was selected in advance for 10 minutes, where they would sit there and just listen to the person that sent out that message, not trying to solve anything, not trying to fix anything, just listen, because there wasn't that capacity. And we all feel better when we're heard by our peers. So that is one example of a really simple thing. So let's take that. So that aligns with their vision, because their vision is very much about, supporting the caretakers first. So that aligns with the vision. In terms of an action, that's a solid, simple, everyday action. In terms of policy, one of the policies that was often not being embraced fully was trying to create psychological safety on their team and creating a low impact way for people to be able to come together at a time of need. That worked amazingly well. So it's those simple things. And now if you apply that across all areas of the business, you'll end up with tons of these overlapping processes, but that's the point. And if I'm to wean it down just to one simple line, it's this: people want to feel safe to be themselves at work. It's literally that easy and that hard. At the same time. And so whatever organizations can do to get closer to that, the better. The challenge is it's often more than they bargained for, because it does require a lot of work to develop these kinds of processes internally that will actually bring that out. That was very long-winded.
Yeah, but you raised some really, really interesting points there. That I think you really hit the nail on the head. And with that one example with the children's aid, it sounds like what they were able to do there in essence was communicate through that simple action, even though it didn't take a whole lot of time out of everybody's day. It didn't affect productivity in the workplace, but it very clearly communicated that we as a company, we care, we prioritize this, and this is important. And you brought up another interesting point in saying the importance of communicating that on the different levels of management as well, because there is no point to shout from the rooftops that, hey, we at Google or whatever really care about our people, but then that's not implemented on a everyday managerial level. Because if you're somebody who, might be fighting for custody for your kids, or going through something really, losing a family member or something else that's very traumatizing, if you don't have a manager that is supportive or otherwise held accountable by these values, you might personally feel afraid to approach them. Or if anything, I could see how you could almost create sort of spite for the organization, because you're like, well, they say they do this, but then my manager said that. So
yeah, it can feel like betrayal. If and this is the thing, like a lot of people, so many of us, look, we put a lot of stake of our personal identity and ambition and hopes and dreams into our work. And so if you really believe in an organization, and then when the rubber meets the road, if they're not going to have your back when you really need it, and if to your example, if like my frontline manager isn't living by this bigger vision and values, and this whole system I thought was set up to protect me, because they told me I'm in the fam for so long. If that's not actually there, then it's just lip service, and it's a waste. And what's really interesting about, I appreciate you raising that, because the other side of the equation is really important too, which is raising awareness that this isn't just something that is on the leadership nor managers. Like everyone of all levels of the organization has an active stake in this. However, it does have to be embraced by the leadership to allow their teams to have that latitude of saying, okay, well, we're going to create this little micro initiative. And it seems maybe kind of silly and trivial on the surface, but we're doing it because there's this deeper need. Like, and having that level of buy-in is absolutely essential. So yeah, it's, this is all about it's almost creating this check and balance system where it's like, if we are saying that we want to be this amazing world-class employer, but we're not actually leading with that when people really need it, then what are we doing? Like, there's a great example for any Canadian listeners. Bell, major national telecommunications company, like AT&T or Verizon or what have you, they have this National Mental Health Awareness Day every January called Bell Let's Talk. And they donate 5 cents for every hashtag that's on Instagram and Twitter and whatnot. And so it's been this great way for people to come out and talk about mental health, and they have all these ambassadors and blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? Bell is notoriously shitty to their employees. How do I know that? We run a fucking therapy business. Excuse my language, but like it's out there. Like, and it's not just us. There's been many articles about how frontline managers and decisions are not made with the employee's best interest in mind as they were running this campaign. It's a double standard. And so guess what? It makes them look like idiots. And it also makes their employees feel like they're part of the charade, right? Of saving face, which is just humiliating. And thankfully, they've taken some steps to rectify things, but there's still a lot that goes on in that organization and other major organizations, of course, too, to be fair to them. These are big, prickly problems. But like, you can't, it's not enough just to say it anymore. Our generation is smart enough and aware enough. Like, if you're going to say you are invested in your team's mental health, you sure as hell better act like it, or else you're going to end up discredited very soon.
Yeah. So, so then you don't need to mention any names or anything like that, but just it's kind of like a top line observation that you've made in working with companies and really having a look at their systems and that they have in place around mental wellness. What is some of or even just one of the things that you've noticed that people are consistently getting wrong, where it's like they think they should be doing this, but they're kind of way off, or they're missing something really important?
That is a fantastic question. Honestly, I think I think the biggest thing is making everything into a crisis. So there's this natural association between mental health as an idea and crisis. And we've worked with so many companies, and I've gotten called by so many like chief people officers late at night that are like in a panic because one of their employees maybe said that they're feeling depressed, or maybe that they, don't really see the point anymore. Like a very sort of wide open statement like that could be, on one hand, you could infer suicidality on that. On the other, you could, maybe they're reflecting on their career or, a different area of their life. And, just like even, actually this happens often where an employee will say something like that to a colleague, the colleague won't know what to do with that, and then it'll get passed up to the manager and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it always ends up, one of the common things that happens, I shouldn't say always, but one of the common things is it leads to this like alarm of like, literally like, you have executives that are like calling groups like us being like, we need an intervention. Like, we need to get a therapist. We need to get this person to do a therapy office right now. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, slow down. Has anyone actually talked to the person yet? Have you talked to the person, just been like, hey, heard anonymously that, things aren't going so well. You want to talk about it all? Like, is there anything we can do? Oh, no, we don't have time. That's what you guys do. You're the therapy people. You talk. It's like, no. Like, we all have space to be human and to hear each other in vulnerable moments. And organizations are confusing the opportunity for that with a fear of risk. Like risk that they are going to say something or do something or approach it in a way that's going to make the situation worse. The worst fear of any organization is having someone complete suicide. But that is so like, in the discussions of the kinds of organizations that we work with, it happens, unfortunately, but it is not directly tied, very, 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 very rarely directly tied to anything that happens as this plays out in real time. Right? We're talking about something that's much bigger and deeper and has been spewing for a long time. But organizations are so afraid that any conversation about mental health whatsoever is going to point to that direction, that there's this sense of paralysis. Like, who am I to talk to my employee as a person? Who am I to like lean in and ask how they're really doing? What if they say something that is alarming? What if they make me their therapist? I'm not the therapist. And so there's things that we can do to work with that, but that is definitely the number one mistake. And for anyone that's listening, that's found themselves in that position where you feel very nervous. First thing is know that that's natural to feel nervous with uncomfortable conversations. But secondly, remember, you are not the be all and end all. You can be boundaried and empathetic at the same time, right? It's not your role to be the therapist. It is your role to hopefully have that person's back in a way where you can direct them to external support or encourage them to, either speak to someone they trust or to do some reflection or consideration, and for you just to check in on them now and again. But it's not like you're going into a closed door, full-fledged therapy session every time you interact with this person. So that in a nutshell is the thing that most workplaces get all wrapped up in it. And don't be wrong, I think there's cases where being very cautious of your approach is warranted for sure. But more often than not, in from what we see, it causes more harm than good. Because can you imagine how humiliating it would be for you, Lydia, just to pick on you, if you voiced something to a colleague in confidence, and maybe it was just really vague, I'm really not seeing the point of any of this anymore. Right? You say something like that to a colleague, and then the next thing you know, you're getting a knock on your door, back when we used to work from offices, from the CEO of the company. That is humiliating. Let alone what the CEOs want us to do, which is to be in the room too for some reason, or on conference call with them and be like, hey, how are you really doing? It's just because you feel like your trust is breached. You feel like all of a sudden, because you're being human, that's a problem for the organization. That's only going to make things worse. There's a way to empathetically deal with that, but it's not by trying to handle it from a risk mitigation perspective, which is what so much of business is based around. So that's it. So again, just to underline the point, for anyone that ever finds themselves in that position, the best thing you can do is just listen to somebody and ask them, what is it that you need? Most people know what they need when they are down and out, right? They know that they need time, they need space, they need a new habit, they need to speak to someone, whatever it might be, but most people have an idea of what that is. So just ask what that thing is and support them in getting that. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that has anything to do with the lack of education or stigma? I know that's such a dirty word, and it's used everywhere, but that stigma and lack of education around mental health, because yes, everybody's talking about it now. Yes, everybody's like, yep, this is something that we support, but we're not truly educated on what that might mean. So, a person, for example, who might have dealt with a little bit of stress in their life, and they might relate, I guess, sorry, I'm losing my kind of train of thought here. I'm trying to make a really good point, but
you're doing great.
But basically, because we tend to, just as going into a bit of psychology here, we as humans tend to kind of relate to things as we've experienced them. So one person who might just be like, hey, they generally have work stress and a bit of stress at home, and that's about it. They got a couple of kids running around. But another person who might have a little bit more of a serious mental health condition, who then approaches that person, the other person's understanding is only as much as their own understanding of struggle, or what their education level is on mental health. So do you think that maybe education plays a part in that, helping people not be as freaked out when they're in those types of situations, when someone's approached them?
Absolutely. I would argue that we are miseducated often. I think I would sort of liken mental health training in companies that took place during the 90s and 2000s kind of to a sex ed class in the 1940s or 50s. I think we've had a very limited, a very conservative way of talking about workplace mental health. And I think now we are seeing the shortcomings of that. Because one of the big thesis of, if you go back and look at, there's still trainings out there that are still embrace this, but certainly 10 years ago, if you go back and look at some of the trainings that were out there, it was very much about trying to apply a clinical skill set to your business leader or manager. And you got to appreciate that that's not their role. They are not a clinician. One of the most freeing things that I tell leaders all the time is like, yo, it's not your role to be the therapist. And they're like, oh, thank God. Because what do we do when we feel like we have to be something that we're not? We bullshit, right?
Mm.
And then when we're bullshitting, we are in a state of fear, right? Our brains are in a state of fight or flight. Oh my God, this thing's happening. I don't know how to deal with it. I'm just going to make it up. And then we get very jerky in our own reactions, and that can only raise further tensions. And so I think it's a bit of that tends to play out. The alternative approach is to try to leave most clinical diagnoses at the door and just try to talk about what's going on from a deeply human level. To your point about shared understandings and shared experiences, oftentimes that is a wonderful way to be able to engage with an employee or with a colleague or with your boss. Like, I mean, it goes, it can go in any configuration, because that leaves aside any of the more formal mental health, mental illness conversations. Like, leave that stuff for the professionals at the right time if it's required. And I think it's really important that we're just honest around the boundaries of what that looks like. So, because if we feel like there's a clear sense of boundaries, we'll be more willing to engage. Now, one of the things that's been surprising for me in this is, like, we used to lead a lot of our sessions focused on employees around, understanding the basic mental health things that, might come up at work, how to articulate them, how to ask for help. The next biggest thing is actually another thing that we offer that's all based around understanding the boundaries of each group within an organization. And interestingly enough, like, boundaries are kind of freeing in this context because they give us permission and awareness around the things that we can say or can't say, the things that we can expect or not expect, the things that someone can rely on us for or not. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, I'm just playing in my own sandbox, my own boundary sandbox. So I'm willing to engage with you as a human right here, right now, and get you towards, say, what you need, without the fear that, oh my goodness, I'm going to become the only person you've ever told that to in your entire life. And I'm your de facto therapist now. And oh my goodness, you're going to be texting me in the middle of the night about stuff. And I'm just like, not going to know what's, like, we got to get rid of all of that. So what I would say is, like, education around that, education around how to be able to actually really listen to someone and mirror back what they're saying and ask them and explore different things that might be helpful to them, and ask how you could be an accountability partner to a degree in that journey. Like, those are the kinds of things that really do move the needle in a meaningful way in a workplace. It's interesting. It's a totally different mindset, because you leave the clinical stuff at the door, but you have to. Like, that's the only way that we can move this ahead, unless everyone is going to go back to school and become a registered psychotherapist and then be in private practice for 10 years first. Like, that's just not going to happen. So devoid of that, we just have to appeal to our own humility first and foremost.
Great. So now, going to a slightly more current and relevant prickly situation we're all in now, the pandemic. I'd like to get your thoughts on how that has changed and how that has impacted companies and their approach to mental wellness in the workplace. Have you seen, well, we all know that people have been kind of freaking out now. We can't avoid it. I hear people from Australia, where I'm at, friends and family, telling us some of the crazy things that have been going on within their own organizations, and some have taken this approach of, like, everyone go home, look after yourselves, come back when you're ready. Like, just things that companies would just never do. And that, to me, says that most people weren't prepared and did not know what to do in the event that something really terrible happens. I'd be interested to know from somebody who works and speaks to companies on that kind of level, what COVID has done to shake things up, and what it's meant for what it's meant for companies.
So, how in an airport, if you need, like, a charger for your iPhone, and you go to, one of the general stores in the terminal, how the iPhone charger is like $26 or something, and like a stupidly high price point. and you have to buy it anyway, so you do. It's kind of a similar thing right now, where like if you imagine a matrix where one axis is pain and the other is urgency, we're like totally in like the top right quadrant right now. And how that plays out is like there's really nowhere for employees to hide right now. Like no one's it's increasingly impossible to mask these struggles that we are facing. Why? Because we're zooming in together from home. So that boundary is lost. And not only that, most people weren't set up to work from home in a solitary environment where their kids and family and whatnot is like locked upstairs. We regularly, of course, we all see like each other's full lives on display. And then on top of that, you have the broader fear and anxiety of what's going on with this pandemic and the very real tactical challenges it's posed in terms of, how do I literally be able to get work done while doing childcare? Or how can I, stay connected and not be totally lonely in a basket case, living in a condo alone? Or how can I reasonably care for a loved one that I can't physically see? Like those kinds of things are happening to all of us at the same time. And so something really beautiful, scary, but beautiful kind of happens when these moments occur, which is we all kind of see that none of us are alone. A friend of mine, he's like this leadership speaker, Drew Dudley. He has this wonderful saying. It's such a good line. He says, the most important thing you can do for anyone is to show them that they're not alone. And in a way, COVID has forced that hand. We've all seen that we are all struggling with any number of different challenges right now. And anything else pre-existing before COVID, it's just kind of been like it's been ramped up, right? Everything's been put in like this particle accelerator where everything just speeds up and everything's colliding now, and it's a real mess. So all of that is to say is that yes, workplaces that would have never really engaged in this topic, or maybe thought of this topic as like a nice to do down the line, they're accelerating a lot of internal work on this. But the challenge is still like, it's not just like this Band-Aid fix, right? It's not like you do like one workshop and then like, have an EAP program and everything's hunky-dory. Like really what we're talking is about a broader cultural change in organizations. And that takes time. And so it's been very interesting because early on in COVID, it was very much around, oh shit, how can we just make sure that people are okay? Like almost thinking of mental health as like this crisis response that I spoke about earlier. Like, how can we just make sure that no one hurts themselves? Like, help us do that, right? And then as time has gone on, it's like people have just like, employers, managers, everyone has just kind of seen each other for this bigger humility where all of a sudden we're embracing that, oh, it's not actually just about like let's make sure that there's no crisis. It's really about how can we really change how we connect as people in our organization. And that's been more of the work that's come out lately, which is great because that's where you can really do deep meaningful stuff. So that's one side of it. The other thing I'll say quickly is just that this is, this is made, some organizations are much more effective now working remote, and they've figured out how to transpose their culture to being remote. Engaging on topics of mental health, to my surprise, actually works really well when we're apart because we feel like we are close enough together to connect, but not so close that we are going to be stuck or where those boundaries are going to be broken all the time. So we've been in this really cool, I don't mean this for the literal sense, but like almost this cool safe space where employers in some way feel more free to try this stuff out because it's not happening in real time in a conference room in your office for this workshop, but rather it's like, it's everyone taking a little bit more time, engaging in these topics when they're ready, and in a way that works for them. And that is more comfortable across the board. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we're seeing. And it's not going to end anytime soon. I mean, this is just very much in its infancy.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting that you raised that point that COVID, has been an opportunity for companies to look at some of the things that they've toyed with the idea they thought would be a nice to have. Like one of the things that have come up with a lot of the companies that we've worked with is that setting up that remote workplace setup, or a lot of companies been wanting to do hot desking, or I don't know what the term is here, but in Australia we'll call it hot desking, where we have a certain amount of people working from home, where, you know, in the long run, benefits for that could be saving on rent, or saving on or just creating a more modern workplace. But just in relation to mental health, I think, it sounds like it's been a really good opportunity for companies who haven't necessarily looked at this in the past to start looking at, okay, wow, well, we are dealing with a mental health crisis here, because people are dealing with a whole bunch of different problems and mental strains. What were we missing in the past, and how can we, you know, what can we do to start to implement some of those things now? So I think
exactly.
that's really, sorry, go on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. And like, it's, you know, there's this cool thing that's happening right now where another friend of mine, I can't take credit for this line. He said early on in the pandemic, he said, one of the really cool things about the pandemic, a weird way to phrase it, but one of the really cool things about the pandemic is that you kind of have a sense of what everyone is thinking. Mm-hmm. And that's another way of kind of thinking about it too. And I think it's brought about a wonderful level of humility in many organizations. And I think it's made this topic much less scary for decision makers and executives. Why? Because they're dealing with it too. To an undeniable degree, because they're working at home and dealing with all the strains of everything else and navigating their business through a highly turbulent time. And when leaders are feeling that stress, first and foremost, you know, they're going to be more willing to engage in that on a organizational level. So that's, it's this really cool moment of hitting reset on this topic. I mean, it's obviously terrible that this moment has come at all. You know, this moment, just to underline it is tragic. It's not cool. I'm just trying to find a silver lining in all the pain, but like, it is this moment where I think we are going to start to look at our relationship to ourselves at work and our mental health at work very differently, if we haven't already. And anything that we've been practicing and at times for sure preaching about how more connected, more vulnerable teams outperform others, all of that is being seen on display now in very real time. So it's in terms of this study within leadership, it is a really cool one. So for anyone that's listening out there, regardless of your role in the organization, like, know that whatever you're feeling right now and whatever you've been experiencing, that you are not the only person within your organization that's been going through that. And like, really keep that to heart and focus on that. And if you look at that, it's a wonderful kernel to open up potentially trajectory changing conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think you're absolutely right in when you made that point about that this is something that we're collectively going through. And for the first time, even some of the senior managers or HR managers get it. Because, I mean, just going back to a bit of psychology, I'm a bit of a nerd for that. And, you know, we work in this little bubble of the industry, but traditionally, like, we know that mental health starts to suffer and people start developing things like anxiety and depression and whatnot when we have just accumulation of pressures and strains to our mental health over a period of time. Absolutely. And so now, in the past, you know, traditional people might not have understood that because it's not something they experienced themselves. But now that we are all experiencing these typical things that as humans we're down on our ability to you know, really function and thrive properly, like, you know, fear that we might lose our health, our family's health, fear we might lose our income and roof over our head, fear of uncertainty, like all of those core human needs are really being stretched and pushed. And all of us are feeling that at the same time. So for the first time, it's almost like we can be like, oh my God, yes, I get it. Like, I get what it's like to be under all this pressure. And still have to perform really well at work. I still have to show up at work, and I still have to make sure I'm meeting all my KPIs and performing and whatnot. So if anything, it's been a really good opportunity to band together and be like, like that's what it's all about. Like that's yeah.
Yeah, and you can't hide it anymore either. Like the other way of looking at it too is like, you know, for some of the, especially the tech companies that we work with, where their employees are a little younger and, you know, maybe don't have families or partners or you know, are kind of in that stage of life where you can grind it for 18 hours a day. It's also shone a spotlight on how many cultures have just overworked their people too. And so it's really interesting because we're just seeing a whole other side of everyone that we work with day to day, and you know, it's something that we can't really suppress, we can't really hide it, and that is it's a beautiful thing to have it be pulled out and for everyone to see. It's sort of scary and it's vulnerable, but to your point, those moments of with your colleagues where you're like, oh my God, yeah, like you're feeling that too. Oh, you're experiencing it. Oh, isn't this shit? Like those moments, they're emotionally validating. And yeah, you know, as everybody, if you're listening to the Happiness Planner podcast, I mean, emotional validation, that's like crack. Like it's like that is the shit. And we don't really focus on that very much at work typically. We just don't. And so, but now we can't help but stumbling into that territory. And so what a cool moment to take a hard look in the mirror and ask, how are you engaging with your colleagues? How are your bosses engaging with you? How are you engaging with them? How are you engaging with clients and stakeholders and partners? And how can you bring more of yourself into that? How can you embrace this opportunity even more? What kinds of connections will come out of it? You know, we can't give it this sterilized version of ourselves. Like if you're a toy train collector or something, like put them in the background.
Oh no.
Behind your Zoom, and there's going to be some guy in a hobby, then an interest, and then you'll build that rapport. And before you know it, you know, you'll have that that relationship to build from. I'm being facetious, but like for real, like try to not suppress yourself right now as much as you can, because it's a liberating moment if you don't have to. It's already liberating enough in many ways, just from the change that we've been through. We've almost at the other side of this thing, but like
Sorry, I lost
is
you there for a
pretty
moment.
rare.
The video just froze for a moment. So if you don't mind repeating
Oh,
that,
oh,
it's
oh
you
my
were
goodness.
saying it's a
Well,
very
all this is to
liberating.
say,
Yeah.
yes, all of this is a very liberating moment. It's a liberating moment to be able to be yourself and to be able to try your best to put yourself on display. I mean that lovingly, but put yourself on display to your colleagues, to yourself, and try to not hide the warts, and just be. Because we have spent so many years of our lives in our career and in education and in our social circles and in our family lives trying to display this version of ourselves that has received the validation to get us as far as we have, that at a certain point in time that, you know, we don't gain much more by playing into that. And if you're on the edge of really wanting to open up to your peers, or if you want your peers to open up to you, if you just want to feel that connection and that safety with those that you're around, I mean, be the leader there. And vulnerability is very contagious. So it's a wonderful moment for each of us to shed our baggage and be who we really are at work.
Yeah, great. I guess, you know, we fast forward some time ahead, when all of this is over, and then we might forget, and we might just breathe a sign of relief and be like, oh, thank God this is all over. And then we forget about all these wonderful lessons that we've learned. But the reality is that within any organization at any given time, there's always going to be people that have got different levels of things going on, or different paths that they've come from, that might make them, you know, one person might have been brought up with, you know, being bullied their entire life. So they, or being, growing up in an abusive household, or, you know, things like that, that makes them a lot more susceptible to to crumbling under pressure, or having too much going on. And at any given time within an organization, there's so many people with so many different mixed backgrounds, that company leaders need to be, I guess, aware of and sensitive to. Does that make sense? Right.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Absolutely.
so we might not see those things necessarily, but again, in creating that culture of support and encouraging that kind of support and expression, that's really important to helping people feel comfortable. But what are some of the ways do you think that we can educate leaders to, I guess, maybe pick up on it is not the right thing to the right word necessarily, because you did mention that it's not their responsibility to fix everybody or anything like that. But what are some ways that they can show their support, or just help people feel generally comfortable? I don't know if that makes a lot of sense.
No, it does. It absolutely
Yeah.
does. So the word that I just wrote down that was coming to mind as you were describing that is the importance for leaders to embrace curiosity right now, like radical, honest, transparent curiosity about the people that they work with, about their lives, about their experiences. I think when we are in a workplace environment, like when we're in a physical office that has a predetermined culture and way that we do things and how we show up and how we talk to each other, and we have our KPIs and our values and our mission all up there on the wall, there's not a lot of space for that the same level of curiosity as when someone is sitting in their home and talking to someone else maybe on Zoom in their home, seeing them in their context.
Mm.
So embracing that curiosity and really trying to get to the heart of some of the most transformative moments that each of your key people have experienced. We do this thing, this very cool exercise with leaders often, where we will ask them about what their universal human experiences. And that sounds very heady, but what we're ultimately getting at is like, what is your journey as a person through your childhood, your teenage years, your adult years, that has gotten you to here today as you? Like, what is, if you had to summarize that story arc in one sentence, what would it be? If you had to describe it in 3 sentences, how would that play out if you use the story format? Like, once upon a time, there was a person named blank. Then one time blank until blank happened. Like, what would that be? And what we end up finding is the things that have shaped us the most are the things that we often hide from our colleagues. And that is a powerful way to demonstrate to leaders that, oh my goodness, me as a leader, I've been suppressing this and playing into this other side of me. And maybe, just maybe, my colleagues, my employees, my partners, maybe they've been doing that too. And if you have that awareness, it leads to this curiosity that's sort of rooted in this cool place of being comfortable with not knowing, and just being genuinely curious about someone's lived experience. And I think there's more time than ever before to do that. I know business is busy, like I get that, but like now is the time to do that if you are a leader, because that conversation, that dialogue, whether it happens once or 2 times or 3 times, that will do so much more for engaging someone and really trying to understand who they are and why they're here and what makes them tick and what will make them stay and all those things and anything else. But you have to do it without an agenda. You have to just go in, be like, I am genuinely curious about what makes you you. Let's talk about it. Like that. When's the last time that anyone that's listening has gotten that level of curiosity from one of their, other than their direct manager, maybe, because that's like trained by HR people to do that stuff. But like, when's the last time the CEO of your company or like the CSO or whatever has sat down with you and been like, hey, like really, like what makes you you? Like, well, how did you end up here? And don't just give me like the highlight reel, like, but like, how did you end up this way? Like what, like that is, like that's just a beautiful area to be in. So I think coming out of COVID, I certainly feel like with a lot of the companies that we work with, that a lot of decision makers and leaders have just naturally been more have been going a little deeper with their people. And I certainly hope that trend continues, because there, like I said before, there's nowhere else to hide right now. So that's definitely what came top of mind there in terms of
Mm.
what can be done. Um, and I think I think just, one of the things that is just really important in being curious is just like, be curious and then understand who you are and where you are. Like, it's really, it's all well and good for like a privileged CEO to be like, I'm going to be really curious and a little bit open, but like, you can't make anyone say anything or disclose anything forcefully. You never should. And that's why just tapping into your own empathy first and seeing what comes back is amazing. And don't judge what you hear or what you don't. You're just a person asking a question genuinely.
Mhm.
Stay in that role and amazing things will happen. Deviate from that role and a weird power play will develop that won't move the
Mhm.
conversation ahead. Yeah, I feel like that is, it's so simple, but it's often so missed.
That just sounds like a quality of a really good leader to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody who's very relatable, and if anything, it makes you as a leader more powerful and effective. Um, yeah, so I guess I'd like to just touch on some of the work that you do. You really place a lot of emphasis on openness and transparency, and that bringing that honesty in into the workplace. Why do you think that is so important?
Well, I think it's important because I know when I used to work for other people,
Yeah.
um, that I genuinely did not feel like I understood those that were around me. And I felt like they didn't understand me. And, when I remember in one of my last jobs, like I had gotten a couple pretty nasty health diagnoses, and my mental health was very poor at the time. And I was just in a really bad place. Like, if we were to look at sort of like the pie of life, where like each slice is a different area of life, like finance, relationship, blah, 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 like everything was in the shits. And it just felt so lonely and isolating. And what I, what I took away from that experience is like, there's this desire that if you feel like you're going to be alone, you go down one of two paths. One is you just accept the loneliness and you're in a place of stagnation, and you just sort of stick around because it's a job, but you start to lose sense of yourself and maybe your own passion, and you kind of snap out of it a couple years later. And I definitely did that. But then I
Mm,
also did this other thing, which is I left. I
mm,
realized that if I wasn't going to feel connected to those that were around me, that I didn't really want to work with them. And I honestly thought that that was very entitled of me. At the time, I was like, like this seems really like needy, like millennial me, you know. But I mean, I had gone to school studying conflict negotiation and mediation, and then started my career in social research. And I knew the importance of belonging and connection in order to make great things happen. And so that steadfast belief very much, it sort of just led back to this expectation that I had for myself, and by extension for any workplace that I was in, that if I didn't feel safe to be me, like psychologically safe, so meaning like
mm,
I feel safe to speak my mind, to suggest ideas, to voice a challenge that I'm having either at work or in the rest of life, and feel totally comfortable and believe that I wouldn't be judged or held back in light of that. If I didn't feel that way, then I just wasn't going to be there anymore. And what I've realized in the years since, this is quite a few years ago now that I was in that position, like what is that is a very deep, profound, but also incredibly common desire for our generation
mm,
in the workplace. And so embracing that, I think that transparency is absolutely essential. I mean, it's, to be less sort of hokey about it, like for real, we live in a very entrepreneurial generation where
mm,
many people in many organizations could go out and do it on their own. or they could have a side hustle that turns into something, or they could go and jump around to different competitors. But you don't want them to. You want them to stay, and you want them to stay because hopefully you're doing something that's much greater together. Going back to what we talked about off the top, being that vessel, having business be that vessel for self-actualization. And when those cultures are created, amazing things happen from an operational standpoint. So I think all of this to say is like COVID has really highlighted that there's very few places that we can hide. And now I think this is all sort of a course correction where our expectations for employers and for leaders are going to be they're much more proven to the leaders themselves. Like, I think most leaders are going to come out of this saying, wow, yeah, I really see the necessity of a little bit more honesty and transparency with my team, because we were just through this incredibly difficult, challenging period. And the only way that we got through it was by engaging human to human on that level. Like, taking that awareness into the future is critical. Now, not everything needs to be vulnerable, and not everything needs to be shared from the rooftops, right? Like, this goes back to the boundaries thing. Like, you can talk to someone about the most traumatic event that you've ever encountered in your life without actually talking about it. Like, it's really about getting comfortable and building awareness around the things that you've experienced without having to relive it. So, like, case in point, like going back to this idea of like the universal human experience, if I accept that you and I, Lydia, have shared the exact same things, but in entirely different contexts, right? Like, you and I, we've never met before today, but we've both probably felt we felt a sense of betrayal before in our lives. We felt a sense of brokenheartedness. We've had a desire to feel like we belong. Those are things that every human on earth understands, right? Just intuitively, we understand that. And so it's more thinking that way and less about the specifics, right? It's not important that I tell you my broken heart stories, or when I felt betrayed, or when I've had that desire for belonging against all the odds. What's important is that you trust that I've been through it and so have you. And so it's about building that skill set from a very genuine perspective with leaders, so that they can connect to their people better, and vice versa. And then that nurtures within its culture. So all of that is to say is, like, if you can do these things, workplace mental health will naturally become a priority, because you will become more exposed mutually to each other's tough shit. And at that point in time, it's going to be very clear that the only way ahead is by investing in one another. And that is the amazing moment that we're at right now, coming out of COVID. Again, it's terrible that it took us COVID to get there, but it has accelerated to like an exponential degree how organizations are tackling these challenges.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point out, because we have been talking so much about being open and being so honest and raw and whatnot. Just wanted to point out that, we don't mean in saying that you go to work and you start telling everybody about everything that's going on in your life. It's not about that. It's
no.
And forgetting about work and being like, okay, we're just going to have like a big therapy session now. Like, there is still there is the business goals that need to be met. There is the productivity that needs to happen. But it's more so about just creating that environment, that supportive environment where people know that is there, and that people do get it and they do have that support, because that in turn, by the sounds of it, helps the organizations, or helps the companies achieve their goals. Anyway, it's kind of like this weird thing, because you're doing that and you don't want to get too much into the mushy kind of side of things, but by doing that and helping people be supported, you're actually helping them get more out of themselves, being there, being comfortable and being in that place,
and
in the workplace.
That is the trade-off, exactly. And that's what the balance that we try to, that every workplace, certainly the ones that we work with, that they really want to get to. Like, believe me, like, as much as I talk about vulnerability and openly, and like I have a youth program called What's Your Big Lie, where people text in the lies that they live anonymously, and we project them on screens and auditoriums. Like believe me, I'm all on the train for vulnerable shit, but it's got to be in a way that is strategically valuable Now, the challenge is like anytime I say strategically valuable, immediately it's like, oh, for manipulative purposes. It's like, no, but like, what is it's a question like, what is the one thing that I could tell you about myself that would help you like see who I really am? Like being really mindful of where and how we let other people in is not a manipulative thing. It's manipulative if we're trying to display a certain image of ourselves or try to get something transactionally out of someone else. That is manipulation. But like there's nothing wrong with us being aware of what are those key things about me as a leader, as a person that are important for you to know. And how do I make sense of that in my mind? And how does that intersect with who you are? There's nothing wrong with being aware of that, because the alternative is just us like having a conversation about bullshit, right? And you're like, oh, how was your day? Oh, it's good. How was yours? Good. Like, I mean, it's just not the way that we're going to move things ahead culturally. Yeah.
Well, I actually wanted to ask you about what's a big lie, because that seems to be that sort of launching pad that you provide for companies or schools to start to have that, build that kind of environment where people can understand each other and know that others have also had those same human experiences. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and what that does for companies, that offering?
Sure. This was an accident. It was an accident that this program even exists. And it's also been, I mean, the term big lie with the US election has also been co-opted for more devious purposes. So I'm not sure what the future holds in store. But anyway, effectively, about 6 or 7 years ago now, I was connected through a friend of a friend who was building a youth program where they were working in a rural environment, and they were trying to find a way that kids and young teenagers could speak openly about some of their self-worth challenges without it turning into like a pile-on or anything that couldn't be sort of contained. And they said like they want to do something where you're like, they're allowing kids to open up, but they don't really know what that looks like. And the question was posed like, well, what would, do you have any ideas? And I naturally was like, I don't know, like imposter syndrome galore. But I ended up, at that point in time, I was, that's a whole other story. I was in a terrible, terrible, terrible place. And I had realized that in the months before that, I'd realized that like so much of my life and my persona was built upon a lot of bullshit. And it really goes back to for me that like I grew up in an environment where I was extraordinarily bullied from the time that I was in grade 2 to grade 12. Like every day I got the shit kicked out of me. And we're gonna have to cut in. Sorry, my audio just, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, there. It turned out for me that I was I was living this big lie that because I was bullied for so long, that I really, really hated myself from a young age. But I put on this persona of not just being okay with myself, but like having a lot of like self-love, which is like there's no crueler thing we can do to ourselves than like pretend to love ourselves when we really don't. Right? It's just awful. And I hid that. I adopted that that reality for like 2 decades. So, and all of this, I went through an experience where I started to like, with a couple close friends, just sort of get into this stuff and put all the pieces together. And I started to use that term in my own head, this big lie idea. So fast forward, I suggested to this guy, this friend of a friend, I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could create a way where people could share without the fear of being found out? And if we could do it in real time, in their school, in their auditorium, and we would do it by anonymous texting. So we could build a platform where people could share anything in a couple lines and it would go up on the screen. It couldn't be traced back to them. Wouldn't that be amazing? Just see what comes out. Maybe it would help us see each other in a different way. And much to my surprise, he emailed back right away and was like, I love it. And I found myself doing a pilot of it only a couple weeks later. And I could tell you so many stories about the crazy things that happened, even in those first series of events. But like, it just hit. And it made it very clear that all of us live a lie to some degree. Not necessarily every day, but just like part of ourselves. We suppress a part of ourselves that we define ourselves by. Like we suppress it in terms of we hide it. We hide it from the world, even though we define ourselves by it, which gets us in this weird catch-22 of feeling like everything that we do and everything that we believe has to all add up to this this mirage of ourselves. And it's not just something that we deal with as millennials. It's something that kids deal with. It's something that teenagers deal with. It's things that retirees deal with. Like we've done this program now with kids as young as grade 5, all the way up to retirees, actually. And it's a universal thing. We all have something. And so the What's Your Big Lie program, it's designed to get that out there as quickly as possible. So what it fundamentally does is it builds trust in a room quicker than anything that I've ever experienced. Like it just because it's there, it's empirical. Like you, no matter what kind of thinker you are, if you're someone more emotional in your thought or someone more analytical, like the evidence is there regardless. The feelings are there. You see what we're putting out there. And then you look around the room and you see that everyone is having the same reaction of, oh my goodness, I can't believe what's on the screen right now. And then there's this amazing part of it where we ask people to step forward and share a bit of their big lie, whatever they feel comfortable with, right? And to our conversation earlier, it doesn't have to be everything, right? Just like a little bit, like what's a sliver? And that just has this transformational impact of totally changing how we see each other. So you can imagine with a team, it's incredibly impactful. With companies, it's incredibly impactful. With kids, it's beautiful. Like I always used to say, like, and fortunately, I don't do that program as much as I used to. First year or two, I did it hundreds of times per year. But like I always used to say, every day that I do the program, it's the most special day of my life, and I really meant that. Like it's like an incredible thing to see this openness from others. And look, like let's cut the bullshit. Like I'm a cis white guy. Like so, like far be it from me to go in and ask people to open up about their inhibitions of their lived experiences, right? But like the point of it wasn't that. That was the cool thing about it. Like it, because this is really like one of those few moments where everyone else is on display with a true form of themselves. And then the dialogue very much becomes peer-led about why do we feel this way? What does it mean? What are we robbing ourselves of? And having that be peer-led at a company or in a school, you can imagine how impactful that is. And so the real magic of the program doesn't really happen until later on, when there's follow-on conversations and people getting to know each other and being able to see each other in different ways. So it's been a beautiful experience. It really has. And that program has, working backwards through our conversation, that program really informed of how we see the needs of workplaces and what leaders really need to step up to do. And again, it's not to say you have to go around and broadcast your big lie to the world every second of every day, but it is to say that you can look at that as anecdotal evidence of how much we suppress and the amazing power of being able just to open up marginally about that to the people we deal with every day.
And then the challenge then is maintaining that, obviously, that in the day-to-day and figuring out, okay, how can we take a little bit of the learnings here and make that part of what we do, part of the culture of our workplace or school or whatever that might be.
Yeah, I said before and I'll say it again. It's that easy and it's that hard, right? Like it's totally a bit of both, and that's okay. And not everything needs to go back to, not everything needs to be a through line right back to that either. Like you can do a lot of things that are informed by a vulnerable exercise like that don't necessarily go back to rerouting the same vulnerability or the same themes.
Yeah.
Because what exercises like to do is it allows us to see each other not just as colleagues, but as people, as full living, breathing people. And the more appreciative we are of that, the more opportunities that we're going to have to be able to, to go back to psychological safety in the Google example, to feel psychologically safe with one another. So that's the whole point of it. And it's a tough clip for sure for companies to feel like, oh, we have to like move this ahead every day. And it's like, on one hand, sure, the company should create the envelope for that, but the real magic comes from everyone, the people, right? Like the best workplace cultures are this perfect dance of grassroots led initiatives that encourage this with the active engagement of people managers and leaders. That's where the real magic is. And I
Mhm.
really, really believe coming out of COVID, we're going to see more and more of exactly this.
Great. And I guess finally, my question to you is, what are some of the other ways then that you're supporting companies right now with their mental wellness strategies?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, our company does a lot of work. Like a lot of these training programs and whatnot. I mean, that's a huge part of what we do. But the other side of it is we support employees with access to really great therapy. So
Mhm.
we kind of have our own EAP like program for companies where they can rest assured that their people are being well taken care of by our wonderful therapists. And it's totally anonymous. It's like a credit-based system, super lightweight, relatively cheap for companies to engage. And we support a bunch of employers from coast to coast in Canada that way. So that's a big focus. But I mean, the thing beyond that is, I think as a brand, we're really trying to be at the forefront of mental health innovation in the country in terms of care and service. And so what that means to us is like, we're kind of at this point right now where we just accept that therapy is this thing that many people can benefit from. And that sessions are an hour long because that's how they are. But like, for us, it's about trying to really rethink that model and about the methods of care and delivery so that's more accessible and more amendable to the people that utilize that service. So, for example, ways that we're rethinking about is we offer now, we launched Canada's first on-demand therapy service for companies and individuals with our partners at Maple. Maple's a big virtual care app in Canada, category leader. It's our therapists that are on there. And we designed this program where basically kind of like you order a car in Uber, you can order a therapy session on demand. And whoever's next available will get back to you within a couple hours at most, often a matter of minutes. And you'll be talking to someone right away, not for crisis purposes though, but like because something's going on in your world. And so that's just an example of where we're trying to evolve the products and services, just like if we were a tech company in another vertical, really trying to evolve. Healthcare is slow, it's stagnant, so is training. And so whatever we can do to shake the trees, that's where we are headed.
Amazing. Great. Thank you
Cool.
so much for joining us today and sharing all of the wisdom. Yeah, I really got a lot out of it. And I hope that everybody else does too. Thanks for sharing all that with us and spending this past hour or so. We could continue going on and on and on forever, but maybe we can do that later offline.
Always happy to do a part two. Thank you for having me. I know I can be verbose, but I hope there was some helpful hits in there throughout. Yeah, thanks for having me and have a
Absolutely.
great rest of your day.
Thank you. Likewise.